We recently surveyed those who attended the annual Signature Drive Lead Succeed conference back in October on what topic they wished they could have spent more time, and water was the #1 topic. And by judging by the diversity of this audience, water impacts all of us in different ways. We're not going to be able to cover all of the many facets of this subject in this 2 hours. This is just the beginning. We will continue to address this issue as we break down this multifaceted subject, our various events. Known as the Headwater States, Colorado has 156 named rivers that originate in its headwaters region. 17 of them exceed 10,000 square kilometers. Colorado doesn't have a water shortage problem. It has a water management problem. Continued warming, poor snowpack, and low river flows have devastated available water supplies to our farmers, ranchers, cities, towns, and industries. This impacts how Colorado will retain its industry base, build attainable homes, and grow enough food for its labor shed. Join us in welcoming our panel of subject matter experts as we discuss water and how it pertains to our economic development efforts, discuss potential policies and programs incentivizing education, conservation, and land use. Outcomes from this meeting today will be compiled into a timely thought leadership paper that is intended to guide conversations and actions at the local level. I'd like to introduce to you today James Eklund. James leads the Water and Natural Resources practice for Sherman and Howard, where he is a strong advocate for smart water infrastructure and a recognized authority on water management in the American West. James works with sovereign governments, multi-state authorities, state agencies, and private interests to deliver critical water infrastructure projects and to design policy regarding water law, natural resources, infrastructure, and environmental protection. James served as Colorado's lead negotiator and signatory on the Colorado River Drought Contingency Plan and as director of the Colorado Water Conservation Board, where he built a reputation as a leader in negotiation and diplomacy. He is recognized for bringing together numerous stakeholders with opposing goals to collaboratively craft binding solutions to common problems. James was the architect of the Colorado's Water Plan, the largest civic engagement process in the state's history, and has served as legal counsel to Colorado's governor. Let's give James a warm Zoom welcome in our typical Zoom fashion. So give emojis, clap. James, I'm going to let you take it away from there.
Thank you so much, Kim. Am I coming across okay? All right. Well, it is just a pleasure to be with you. Thank you so much for organizing this important event. And it's important not just because of the subject matter, but because of the timing. You're really joining this conversation at a critical moment in Western water policy, law, politics, practice. All of the boxes are checked really right now, and red lights are flashing all over the dashboard. So congratulations on joining the conversation if this is your first time to it. And again, thanks to the EDCC for pulling this group together. I'm super excited because we've got just a really excellent panel of experts that I'm excited to share with you, hear their thoughts. They've been influential thought leaders in this space ever since I started doing what I do. And so it's really important that you get to hear from them. I'm going to ramble at you a little bit to set the stage, and then I'm going to introduce the panel, and we're going to get right into hearing from them about their perspectives on these very important topics. So first off, let me introduce the panel. I'll flip the script a little bit on myself there. I'm going to introduce Eric Wallace. He's the former president of the Longmont EDP board, former chair of the Brewers Association and Colorado Brewers Guild, and he's on the board of the River District Initiative with the St. Vrain and Left Hand. So he's really an exceptional person to have on here, because the last brewer that I worked with, John Hickenlooper, really focused on what I know Eric's going to bring up, and that is no water, no beer. And we can maybe stomach one, but The other one's kind of tricky if you're like me. So Eric, welcome to the panel. I know you're gonna have a lot of hot takes on this topic, given that it is a critical, maybe the most critical input into your production. Staying on that theme of production, Mike Bartolo has been, where do you start? He's been 32 years with CSU, farming, sitting on the Super Ditch board. Mike is, he's currently on the Fruit and Vegetable Growers Association board. He's got really his fingers in a lot of different basins in the state of Colorado by virtue of all those hats he wears, and really a finger on the pulse is a better way to put it, for what's going on in agriculture, what's happening with water consumption, and production agriculture is a perspective that he's going to provide a lot of insight on. I go staying kind of with that theme. Travis Smith is a mentor to me throughout my entire journey. He was on the Water Conservation Board when I was the director, and saved me from more than one tough scrape that I was liable to get into in that job. He is the National Wild Turkey Federation Forest and Watershed Health Stewardship lead, and he's current president of the Colorado Water Congress. He has a list that I could go on and on about, but we'd be here all day and would never get to hear from him. So I'll stop there. Travis, welcome to the panel. And then Emily Hunt rounds us off. And Emily is the person that I think of when it comes to water stress in the Front Range, because she is the water lead for Thornton, the city of Thornton, and really critical, important issues that we've come up against as a state have their epicenter right here on the Front Range in the Metro Denver region. So having her voice here and her perspective is just super important, and I'm really excited. I've known Emily for many years, and I know that there are a few smarter people on these topics than this panel that I've just rattled off the names of here. So with that, Kim, I'm going to share my screen, go through my little quick presentation, if that's okay. And by the way, I've read all the chat introductions, and they're just top notch. You guys have just the whole state covered, and this group is going to be, I think, really fun to have this conversation with. So let me share this screen. I'll go into presentation mode. Here's a map that John Wesley Powell, the first USGS surveyor to come out into the West, created. And when he went back to Congress, he said, hey, we should draw our state lines around these blobs as opposed to these artificial survey lines that you just had me draw. And so he thought, well, if we organize our states in the West by river basin, we'll have a lot more success and maybe a little less confrontation around at least water. I probably would have been right. The other important thing to note is, if you can see my cursor, right here is the 100th meridian. And it basically bifurcates Kansas and the country. Everything to the west of this line has to be irrigated to grow. Everything to the east can get by on humidity, precipitation, and temperature and grow just fine without irrigation. So it's a very important line. That's why I start out almost every presentation I give with it. And we'll go from there. This is your state of Colorado. So they ignored John Wesley Powell's instructions and instead carved this shape out. It was really to capture the mineral interests for the Union side in the Civil War. But Lincoln and Grant had inadvertently maybe, but truthfully, captured the headwaters of the West. And we're the headwater state, as Kim mentioned, the 18 downstream states in the country of Mexico that rely on water that starts in your snowpack. And it's been a good year. It's been a good snowpack. where are our water assets? This is a confrontational issue. It's becoming more so because we're talking about stress. And anytime you talk about supply and demand curves crossing each other, you develop a gap. And that gap has been highlighted by the state of Colorado ever since the big drought in 2002. And it really set in motion. The other thing that Kim mentioned was our state water plan. The state water plan, and one of the polling questions that you received at the start of the presentation here, asked about the basin roundtables. Have you been to one? Do you know about your basin roundtable? If the answer to those questions is no, then I would recommend that's a next step for you as we move forward. If you like what you hear or you're interested in what you hear, you may not like it, but you may be interested in it, then please go ahead and take the step of engaging with your basin roundtable. They are open public meetings. They are open to you as a Coloradan. You're allowed to attend, and there are some really important discussions going on in each of them. So do that. This is the state of Colorado. I put it together. Maybe it was because I had just gotten off the history of the Civil War, but these are the battle lines that are drawn in our state. Here are the water assets around our state. I'll start up here in the upper part of where I am today in Denver, in the South Platte and the Republican River Basin. And then you go down to the Arkansas River Basin, where the super ditch concept is operating, that we'll, I'm sure, talk about here. And then down to the Rio Grande Basin, where Travis Smith is, and the San Juan Basin, the Uncompahgre and Gunnison Basin. The main stem of the Colorado River starts in our state at Grand County up in Grand Lake, where there's water quality issues up in Grand Lake. We're going to talk about those, I'm sure. And then up to the Yampa White Green Basin in our state. So those are where our assets are. Those are where the water basins really are in our state. And where are the demands? Well, they're on the Front Range. You guessed it. Emily Hunt is one of these red bars, I'm sure. And then you go down to Colorado Springs and Pueblo. And then those outfits have to go get water from somewhere else, because 80% of our precipitation falls on this side of our state, over here. 90% of our population's where these red lines are. So we go over and grab water from the other parts of the state, and there is threat, kind of conflict in each of these trans-mountain, trans-basin diversions or concepts. The lines on here represent, yes, existing trans-mountain diversions, but also ones that have been proposed or threatened. If you're, and I'm sure Travis is going to talk about that, from the Front Range down to the San Luis Valley, the Rio Grande headwaters, where we currently do not divert water out of to the east. There is a concept that has been making the rounds, and many of you have probably read about, but it's very important to cover that concept. Now, those are all inside our state. Outside of our state, we also have threats. Nebraska is over here on the far eastern side of the map, and they have pushed hard on the Republican River Compact. I should say that because we have 18 downstream states and Mexico that depend on our water, we have 9 interstate compacts and 2 equitable apportionment decrees with the U.S. Supreme Court that dictate how much water we get to use in our state. Roughly, we get to use about a third of the water that falls from the heavens onto our rectangle state. However, the 2/3 of that water has to leave the state under one of those compacts. So that's the Republican River Compact, and under the South Platte Compact, the state of Nebraska has started to talk about, discuss, study the concept of diverting water in Colorado through a canal that they would build called the Perkins Canal, and divert that water into Nebraska to grow agricultural commodities over on their side of the border. That's allowed under the compact, but it hasn't been exercised in the nearly 100 years since we entered into that compact. And so that's kind of ruffling some feathers. You have Kansas. We've litigated with Kansas for 20, 25 years over the Arkansas River Basin compact. And then down in the Travis Smith neck of the woods, you have New Mexico and Texas in ongoing litigation right now in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. By the way, cases between states go straight up to the U.S. Supreme Court under original jurisdiction. So that's why you see that kind of escalation very. And then you go over to the granddaddy of them all, the Colorado River, which has 7 states on it. And it's got the Republic of Mexico, like I said, and that is currently under a lot of stress because of the supply-demand imbalance at Lake Powell, at Lake Mead. I'm going to fly through some slides here. This is really important to understand, and I'm sure it is not lost on anybody in the economic development realm. If you throw a rock, you hit a water provider in this state. And this is just the Denver metro area. And these are water providers that provide water in the metro area. There's water and sanitation districts. There's the Denver Basin Aquifer that sits right below our feet in the Front Range here. These are water and sanitation districts around the state. These are water conservancy and conservation districts throughout our state. So you can see it gets very convoluted and cloudy very quickly. And for a lot of people, they check out. They say, this is too complex. It's 3-dimensional chess. I'm not going to participate in this. You're going to treat it the way I treat healthcare, which is I'm just going to let my doctor tell me what is going to happen there. And I'm going to stay out of the policy discussion. Well, we kind of are past the luxury of being able to do that anymore. So I'm inviting you through this process, through this webinar, to roll up your sleeves and grab a touch point that is important to you when it comes to water and hang on and stay with it, because this is important stuff. It's important because it is very big and it really impacts your economic development in every corner of the state. The Colorado River Basin, because of those trans-mountain diversions that bring water from the wet side of our state to the populated side of our state, we move about, I'm going to start talking in acre feet. An acre foot of water, as you probably all know, but just to refresh your memory, it's the 100 yards between the goal lines on a football field filled a foot high. And if you do that, you've got an acre foot of water, and that can get 3, maybe even 4 average size households through a year on 1 acre foot of water. So that gives you an idea of how much volume we're talking about. 500,000 acre feet move from the wet side to the dry side of our state every year. And that dynamic means that we all care about what goes on in the Colorado River Basin, because that's where, even if you're sitting like I am today in Denver, half of the water in my mug is from the Colorado River Basin. So it's really an important dynamic to understand, and it has ripple effects throughout the state, even if you're not situated physically in the Colorado River Basin. It's a big basin, 243,000 square miles. 40 million people depend on this river. Millions more depend on the food that's produced out of this basin with this water. And it's the 5th, if you just took this basin on your screen as its own country, it would be the 5th largest economy in the world. So we're talking about a lot. These are the trans-mountain diversions I was rambling on and on about that are represented by this little blue arrow. Then you've got the river itself that cuts through the states. And then you have big trans-mountain or trans-basin diversions that bring water to Phoenix and Tucson, and then also over to the Los Angeles, Southern California area. 17 million people live on the coastal plain of Southern California alone. So you can imagine the pressure that's put on that system when, as we have seen, the state water project that brings water from the Bay Delta down to Southern California is cut off because of environmental concerns or because of just a lack of water. That, fortunately, as you are reading in the paper in real time, is not the case this year. We have atmospheric rivers moving into California that are really replenishing their reservoirs, but it is not a way, that's my opportunity to say, we are not out of the woods just because there's a really good swath of storms hitting the California area. And our snowpack looks pretty good statewide. with the exception of the Arkansas and maybe the Rio Grande. Travis can update us on that. But this is really important stuff because we chopped up this river just like we did the others with our interstate, the other 8 compacts that we entered into back in 1922. Here's the way we divided the basin: 7.5 million acre feet. Again, a lot of water for the upper basin's use, 7.5 million acre feet for the lower basin's use. And then in 1944, we got together and did a treaty with Mexico for 1.5 million acre feet. So if you add those numbers up, you have 16.5 million acre feet. Everybody's happy, and we can stop talking about this worrisome issue. Unfortunately, we don't have it. We went from a period of record around the time we negotiated the compact that was about 20 million acre feet of water. And now we're closer to 10 million. So we basically cut the Colorado River in half. Many of our other rivers around the state are experiencing similar hydrologic impact by climate change. And that means that we're going to have infrastructure that was built last century for a probably water policy and law that has been around since the Compacts Clause of the U.S. Constitution. And now we've got real current century problems to deal with, and our tools need to be sharpened. That's what we're going to talk about with this panel. And I'm delighted to finally get into the conversation with them. So I can talk a little bit more later if there is appetite for it about the detail about where Lake Powell and Lake Mead are. But I'm going to stop sharing my screen for now, and we're going to go into the discussion. So right off the bat, we have this. I'll tee this up because we were just talking about it while we were preparing for to go live here. We've got ag and urban. We've got a rural and urban divide that is really, I think, acutely experienced by many of the people on this call. And we need to talk about that. So we're going to talk about that. And I think the first thing I want to tee up, and we'll go through each of our speakers. I'll give them each some time to say their piece. If I butchered your introduction, panelists, you say what I didn't. Feel free to clarify and add. And then I will, and then I'll tee up a question for you. But I'd love if you can work into your introductions and kind of your opening remarks here, if you can say a little bit about what your perspective on the urban-rural divide is, especially when it comes to water. We'll just start down the list as I have it in front of me and is on my screen. Eric, we'll go with you. Eric, I didn't mention that you're an Air Force Academy graduate. And that's my brother's an Air Force Academy graduate, and I'm excited that the guy who's bringing beer to this conversation is also has that background. So I'll let you unmute and take it away.
Yeah, 84 grad from 16 Squadron. I started the brewery actually with a squadron mate of mine. We were both in the same squadron, and there was a third that helped us out with a lot of the financials. So yeah, we've got a really weird kind of an education down there. You learn a little bit about a whole lot of different things. So we're dealing with a complex system problem here, and super complex to solve. So challenging and interesting at the same time. You kind of started off saying water's fundamental to beer. Ag is also fundamental to beer, and to survive as a brewery, a population to buy and drink the beer is another piece of the equation. So water tends to fall into the middle of what we do. We started looking after we both got out of the Air Force. I moved back to the States with my wife, and we were looking somewhere to live. And then we ended up on the Northern Front Range, and then we were looking for a place to build a brewery. And we chose Longmont very consciously. Number one, it seemed open for business, but the biggest initial determining factor was the fact that Longmont has the best water in the state, as far as I know. It's how it seems to me. We've got in terms of quality, it's first use. I'm looking at Long's Peak, which has, it's snowing up there right now, looks like. So we're on the St. Vrain and left hand, creeks that comes in just below us. We have the highest quality water. We don't have a whole lot of mine, issues contaminating water. And we also have some of the most senior rights, because Longmont was started as an ag town back in 1870, I think. And so all of those farms that surrounded us have all had to relinquish their ancient water rights to Longmont as the town expanded. And I believe that right here in our neighborhood on left hand, the principle of first use in the entire Western United States was established over a ditch fight. So it went to court back in the 1800s in Denver, and that informed Western water law. That's what my understanding is from some of the info out at the Coffin Ranch, Sandstone Ranch.
That's spot on, Eric. Yeah, Coffin versus Left Hand is a seminal case in Colorado water law. And it tickles me as a water lawyer. My heart is overflowing because you mentioned that. So keep going.
If you want to see it, just go out to Sandstone Ranch to the overlook, and you can oversee the entire watershed. And the ranch house is right at the bottom of the bluff. It's all right there in front of you where it all started. So when I see these 7 state, the Colorado compact fights, it's really interesting. It's like, oh yeah, all of that started here in Longmont. Kind of interesting. So we chose to be in Longmont because senior rights, water quality, and there's a lot of great infrastructure here. So we're never really too concerned about water. In 2013, we were concerned about too much water. The entire brewery was in the St. Vrain River. We were surrounded by the river completely for a couple of days. So when it flooded, we sit right on the banks of the mighty St. Vrain. And people think that that's a joke. It is kind of a joke, but it's not really a joke. It's also a lot of truth in that. So water for us is fundamental, and that forces us into getting involved in more parts of this very complex system. I'm deeply involved in Prosper Longmont, which is advocating for workforce housing for purchase so that people can buy homes and live here. And why am I involved in that? Because as the chair of the Longmont Economic Development Partnership, being able to house our employees became really the biggest challenge we had here in our community. And I know that we share that challenge with everyone, and I don't want to get too far down into housing, but land use policy and the way we build our communities in the West, because we have this abundance of everything. We have all this water, we have all this land, we have all of this beauty, and it's unlimited, right? So just use as much as you want. Well, when there was 2 million people living in the state, when I first lived here in the 70s, maybe that was still kind of true, but it's not anymore. And we have to radically change, in my opinion, land use, the way cities design themselves in order to start to attack some of the pressures that fall on limited resources. And we're talking about water specifically. Well, the more spread out you are, the more spread out your infrastructure, the less efficient you're building. Single family detached houses obviously use a lot more water than an apartment or a condo or a townhome. So just from that, you can see how housing is directly linked to water use. As our population here has increased in Longmont, the water usage is actually declined some because of efficiencies and modern technology and better like dishwashers and toilets and whatever, all the sexy things that help use less water. But how we design our community to where it's livable, affordable, sustainable. All of those things all kind of swirl around as well. So water for us touches a lot of different things. The bridge right next to the brewery here is going to get rebuilt because to help flood proof this area of the city that we're flood proof. I don't know if you can proof it, but resistant, make it more flood resistant. Here in the next couple of months, they're going to start that project. So I literally sit right in the middle of a floodplain. We're on a little island in the middle of a floodplain. So we think about it quite a bit. That's
fantastic.
Yeah, there's plenty more to talk about, but I'm gonna yield the rest of my time and let's get on with it.
That's fantastic, Eric. Thanks for your opener there. Mike Bartolo, nobody has more of a finger on the pulse of what's going on around the state than you. You're welcome to the conversation. Give us your thoughts on what we're going to be doing. We're facing many challenges. Agriculture has water rights, and those water rights are often senior to the municipal water rights that a city or a municipality might have. And we sometimes don't know that as Coloradans. So maybe you can enlighten us, explain a little bit about the super ditch and what's going on kind of in from your perspective.
Sure. If I guess this might be the time that we interject our kind of our little canned presentations that we have. So maybe I'll go from there, which includes the super dish. So bear with me as I get to that point, James. But thank you, first of all, for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. And I want to say, start off by saying that you're probably going to get from the gist of what I say that I'm pretty high on agriculture. And you might get that impression. And I really am an unabashed supporter of agriculture. And I'm going to admit that right at the get-go. And some of the comments I'm going to have are going to be pretty frank. And I hope you bear with me when I do that. But I wanted to make sure we start off with this, our perception of what agriculture is. We all know it's a very important part of our agricultural economy. That's one thing. But I think we fail or oftentimes underestimate what the value of that agriculture is in terms of giving us food to eat. And I think we caught a glimpse of that during the pandemic when there were some supply chain issues, but it actually can feed us so that the food and the types of crops we grow are amazingly diverse here in Colorado. And we can supply a lot of our needs just here at a local level. We also, those foods can also give us an in-way into producing a better human health. And I don't think we understand that really is that because of our unique climatic conditions here in Colorado, we've got some high elevation and there's some sunlight that enhances this development of certain biochemical compounds in the fruits and vegetables we produce, our soils. And one big thing is we have a huge diurnal variation in temperature. So we get warm days and cool nights. And that brings about a huge amount of development of these phytochemical compounds that can shown to be reduce things like diabetes and cancers. And then
Mike, is that factor why my Palisade peaches taste better than any peaches in any other part of that country?
That is one of the things is that diurnal variation in temperature, warm days and cool nights, helps those fruits and vegetables accumulate sugars, sucrose in particular. So that's exactly one of those reasons. So those are some great things we have about Colorado agriculture, in addition to, just the water thing. It also is going to help us mitigate one of the most, pressing crises we have, and that is the global warming with CO2 emissions. We have an amazing capacity to sequester huge amounts of CO2 through our agricultural processes. So keep that in mind as we're looking at the value of agriculture. One thing I also hear, James, is that, in Colorado, agriculture uses 86% of the water. I always hear that all the time. And I want to clarify by saying it's anybody who eats actually uses 86% of the water. I want to clarify that. It's plain and simple. It just takes a lot of water to grow the food we eat. And you alluded to that earlier in the talk. a typical crop of, say, corn. Everybody knows what corn looks like. A corn in Colorado, it takes about 2 acre-feet of water. So again, using that analogy of looking at a football field, you need not just 12 inches, you need 24 inches of water to grow that corn crop. And again, that can support maybe 5 or 6 different households in Colorado. So quite a bit of people can be supported by just that 1 acre of corn. So it just takes them out. But, you know, that's what we need to do. It takes plants. There's the only way. We can't mutate and develop chlorophyll in our skin. So we have to have this plants as an intermediary to provide us food. And, you know, as a farmer and a researcher, I sometimes ask, you know, why don't we grow this particular crop or that particular crop? Because, hey, that'll solve all our problems. You know, we can just grow this crop and we use less water. Even more pointed question people ask is, why in the world are you growing crops to feed cows? You know, that's the question I always get. And those are legitimate questions, yes, but we need to understand that agriculture here in Colorado developed for a specific reason and under specific environmental conditions. It evolved to where it is now based on the natural resources we have and the market conditions. It doesn't mean that there isn't inefficiencies in the systems, but like any business, Colorado ag needs to be diversified. And in the case of livestock, for example, you look at the state of Colorado, much of the land is not arable. It's very, from a natural resource, is somewhat fragile. So cattle or livestock is the only ways that we can utilize the sunlight that is captured in the native plants to harvest that energy that's captured by the sun. So we use those to graze, you know, our grasslands and our mountain valleys. And then we need water to grow the crops to help supplement their income. So that's where that comes from. Now, you know, in agriculture, I think we also underestimate that we have this fundamental and deep understanding that we need to live in a world with less water. And we're always looking at ways to conserve water. We instinctively know that we are accountable to Mother Nature, and we're constantly aware of that fickle relationship with us. Because every time I see a black cow forming in the east, I know it's pretty fickle. We can lose our crop in an instant. We also know that we will not expand our footprint as far as land issues are concerned and expand the use of our existing water supply. Now, I always jokingly say this, but not really, is just imagine if our municipalities lived under that same reality, that we couldn't expand anything. Now, over the course of my, as you mentioned, 32 career with CSU, I had really a great opportunity to research a multitude of different water conservancy practices. So one of the things I looked at was drip irrigation. And so for those of you that aren't familiar with it, drip irrigation is a way we deliver water through these small plastic, small diameter tubings. I don't know, probably you've seen something like a soaker hose in your garden, kind of the same concept where we really eliminate or reduce the amount of evaporation from the soil surface. So we can reduce our consumptive use by 10, 15, 20% for certain crops. We also use advanced sprinkler systems. Some of you are familiar with center pivot sprinklers, or if you've flown over the Eastern Plains and seen these green circles out there on the plains, those are center pivots. And now they're becoming more and more equipped with these really high-tech sensors that can kind of spoon feed water to that crop. And then we have, incredible changes in plant genetics. So we're developing crops that can grow and develop with just less water. And we're also implementing things like reduced tillage. That means instead of farming the ground and tilling it and plowing it, we leave a lot of crop residues on our soil surface to reduce evaporation. So great tools are out there, and farmers are really at the forefront of adopting these practices and those technologies, but they're also really developing them themselves. So in addition to those on-farm conservation methods, there's some of us in ag who are looking at creative ways to partner with municipalities to buffer their water supply. And so, in a roundabout way, this is where I get to the super ditch. For instance, I sit on an organization called the Super Ditch. And for those of you that are familiar with it, the Super Ditch was formed in the Arkansas River Basin. It's basically a cooperative of different water holders from different canal companies, different farmers coming together to form this super ditch. And what it is we try to come up with a pool of water to put into somewhat of a bank that is available to municipalities to use on a temporary basis to meet shortfalls in their water supply. So I'd say it's like we're developing a new type of crop. So on my farm, instead of growing, say, 10 acres of wheat, I'm going to leave that fallow, take that water, put it in the bank, and that'll be available to municipalities to use. So it's again, a new type of crop. Now, you alluded to that. There's a lot of bureaucratic and sometimes big pitfalls to overcome in trying to address these issues. It's just part of it. And that I think I'd go on and on about that, but we just don't have enough time about that. So I know there's great solutions out there. I've lived with it. I've researched those great solutions, but every fiber of my body, I believe that we can overcome some of that. But unfortunately, a part of me remains skeptical. And if you can bear with me while I go on, this is the part of my presentations where I get a little bit frank. So I may be a contrarian at this point with this group, but I'm guessing that when I hear that such and such a company is bringing X amount of jobs to a front range city, excuse me. To be honest with you, I don't jump for joy. I shudder, and that's my true reaction. Is I shudder because history tells me, and history validates in my neck of woods, that my life, my community, something I dearly love, and I know will hold the key to a lot of these problems that we face, is really one step closer to being eliminated. And that's the reality of that. Some of you on this call may not have heard of these places, but Only Springs, Ordway, Sugar City. Probably some of you never even heard of these places. You may not have heard them because you can't see them from the suburbs along the Front Range. These were once thriving and vibrant communities in Crowley County until the 1970s, when Aurora, Colorado Springs, and Pueblo teamed up to almost entirely dewater that community. It was what we kind of is held up as the prototypical buy and dry. And in its wake, it's left an economic and environmental catastrophe, no doubt about that. Not only did it extinguish the economic driver of that community, but what we don't really ascribe a value to is it took the hopes and dreams and the potential to invent and create from that community. Now, when we talk about Crowley County, if you look at any metrics that describes quality of life, whether it be, health outcomes or poverty, Crowley County is now at the bottom of those metrics, of not only here in the state, but sometimes all around in the country. I know somewhere out there, somebody's going to rattle off a statistic that say, hey, we can justify what happened in Crowley County. But honestly, folks, in my mind, I believe it just was an atrocity, and that's something, and a true belief I'll take with me to my grave. So again, I talked about all those great potentials of super ditch and all these inventive things, but I remain skeptical. And I remain skeptical because when I drive up and down I-25, I see yet another pristine piece of prairie or a nice piece of productive farmland that's consumed by cul-de-sacs and strip malls. I'm skeptical because I continue to see municipalities, not only in our area, but all over the state, and investments groups purchase beautiful farms, and they're not there to be part of this community. They're doing that just for the water. And quite honestly, I'm remaining skeptical because of the rhetoric of our elected officials. Not to single out Colorado Springs, but I was listening to an ad the other day. There were several mayor candidates that had ads on the TV. And the typical rhetoric was, we need to secure more water for our city. We need to bring in more jobs. And we need to keep our city moving forward. And I sat there for a second. I says, where are you moving forward to? Where is this place that you're moving forward to? And what does it look like? Now, if history is any indication, that road to that forward place was really paved with communities with mine. The hopes and dreams and the potential of my community was really paved under that road forward for a lot of the Front Range communities. And so I never get it. And so thank you for allowing me to speak freely of that. But it is encouraging, however, that, in survey after survey, I see that a lot of people in Colorado value agriculture. In the Colorado Water Plan, there was just an overwhelming response to that. Nonetheless, I still see this beat of unbridled growth and development and buy and dry that was so devastating to Crowley County, go on and on. I think after some thought, I've got to think, what is really causing this in Colorado? Why do we, even though so many people don't want this to happen? And, some people has described to me, well, that's what greed looks like. And, I said, nah, that's other factors. To me, I've labeled it the Labrador factor. Now, bear with me while I try to explain what this means. So any of you that's had a Labrador retriever dog or a mix of Labrador, you can put a cup of food in front of them, or you can put the entire bag of dog food in front of them, and they're going to eat it as fast and as much as they can. It's just part of their DNA. That's just what they have to do. They're afraid somebody else is going to eat it. And I think that's kind of what infects us here in Colorado. We can't see beyond what's right in front of us and our own particular needs. So we're going to eat as much of it as fast as we can. And so, economic and growth and other things that's kind of, in my mind, could be attributed to in the same way that a Labrador treats a bowl of dog food. But really, in all sincerity, we really do have some incredible opportunities to work synergistically in the state. I believe that to my core, honestly do. But oftentimes when I talked, I'm used to talking to farmers, not economic developers. So when I put this together, I wish I could magically convey to you the passion I feel about agriculture in my communities. I wish you could see the incredible sense of joy I feel when I'm talking at a farmer's market in front of some customers and delivering them food. And I wish you could feel the heartbreak I have after a hailstorm. I wish you could have seen Crowley County when it was this beautiful, beautiful place. And I wish you could see what it looks like now. If you did, maybe you perhaps wouldn't just put your scorecards on how many jobs you delivered or housing starts or whatever metric you use to say you're moving forward. But I wish you had another column on your scorecard, one that says, how did you improve the quality of life in some other community and maybe in some other place or some other town that you never even heard of? Just to finish, I was driving around the other day in my community. It was just a beautiful night. I was driving around and I saw this 14 or 15-year-old kid driving around this huge tractor as at sunset. And it was absolutely gorgeous. I wish I could describe it and what it felt like. And I just had to pull over to the side of the road and sit there. And I got to think, what am I going to say to a bunch of economic developers? I'm not sure. And I thought to myself, basically this kid and his kids and his grandkids deserve a chance to be here. Pure and simple. And, I know you're here, you're interested in water, and I hope you guys feel the same. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to do that.
Mike, good stuff. Great stuff. And I think the folks on the call really appreciate your frankness and you're bringing that message. You've done a great job, despite your self-doubt that you're having a hard time conveying that passion. I think it's coming through. So good job. It's not if we grow, it's how we grow, right? I mean, you're saying that economic development, needs to take into consideration more than just the X's and O's, more than just the bottom line. And I think the group of these folks that I've had the pleasure of talking to over the years is they get that. They understand that we've got to put a lot more thought into the way in which we develop economically in Colorado if we're going to retain the place that has all those magical attributes that you did so well describing. That's what makes Colorado separate and special in as a place to live, as a place to grow your family, as a place to grow your business. And agriculture is part of the economic development and engine of the country, which Eric, I think, brought up right out of the gate. We all rely, it's very, very circular. All these inputs really matter to a whole host of everything we do, from aerospace to brewing beer, to data centers, and the food that all those people have to eat has to come. We want it to come from a secure source, from a local source, if at all possible. And that's what you're talking about. That passion is there. Thank you for providing it. we're going to stay on that theme. I promise we'll give Emily, you're going to get a little more time than anybody else, because I'm going to go to Travis next, and we'll have you bring up your experience and your perspective here in a second. But Travis Smith, you are in the San Luis Valley. You have been just a champion for the kinds of water collaboration and cooperation around our state on so many different issues, but many of the ones that were talked about by Mike just now. So I want to turn it over to you, and please, before you're all done, please work in some information about the National Wild Turkey Federation. If you're like me, folks, you think of wild turkey and you might think of whiskey. And the reality is this federation has a really indelible mark that it's left on the West because of the way in which our watersheds are managed, and our watershed health is really a primary focus of the National Wild Turkey Federation, who has a very unique relationship that Travis will, I'm sure, go into with the U.S. Forest Service. And it really is a thing that, again, makes Colorado stand out as being a special place, because their collaboration and cooperation across many different sectors. Travis, I'm going to turn it to you.
All right, James, thank you for the kind words. And I'm really encouraged. I'm looking at the names on the list. Those of you that have turned your cameras on, thank you. What an important issue, and your role in Colorado's future from an economic development standpoint, and the conversation about water. So you probably noticed by my first slide, James and I kind of have the same DNA about the history and how important history is in talking about Colorado history. And I would suggest just a little more background. I am an ag guy. I'm a water administrator. I'm a water right owner. I have 2 1873 water rights on a small tributary on San Francisco Creek, one of the driest places in the San Luis Valley, but culturally rich. My background is water administration and policy, and now my wife calls it my encore career. I get to work for the National Wild Turkey Federation, dealing with forest health. I know very little about wild turkeys, but I know a little bit about the importance of water, as you do, and the importance of water development, and are we going to have what we've received in the past. So thank you. I'm encouraged looking at the participant list from all over the state, from small towns, from the San Luis Valley, from the Upper Rio Grande to the four corners of the state. Thank you for your willingness to participate and to listen to us bring our perspective here. And so, Kim, we'll quickly go through these slides. This 100th meridian that James described earlier, there is a great book out there, if you're interested, by Wallace Stagner. It is, in my opinion, a must read if you're interested about water development in the West. So that's on your to-do list, and maybe at another webinar we can talk about your takeaway from beyond the 100th meridian. This line drawn in the sand. I get to bring this presentation to Nashville at our national conference. Eastern United States really doesn't understand what makes things tick in the West. We do, because we live here and we know it is a dry, harsh place, and it's really harsh without water. So Kim, could we go to the next one, please? Thank you. Here's this character right here, and anybody that's been in the water business for any length of time has heard this quote. And I think it's been proven that Mark Twain didn't actually say this. He probably took credit for it, but whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. And no doubt we've done a lot of fighting over water in the West. But I would also offer there's been more ink spilled by lawyers over trying to decide about how to divvy up water in the West. Way more ink has been spilt than actual blood, but there are some great stories. Whether they're from the Arkansas Valley, I have my own as a young water commissioner in 1977. The emotions behind water rights, the strong emotions, the cultural tie to water rights in Colorado. So I would suggest for all of us to consider, whiskey's for drinking, water's for fighting. It's not appropriate any longer. Water is way too important for us to continue fighting over. We have to find a way to make the existing water supplies that we have work harder. And that takes cooperation. It takes willingness that Mike had suggested there earlier. It's the public awareness that we're talking about today. And trying to get a picture from the Gunnison Chamber to different places around, those who are participating today, you have influence in your community about the rich Colorado history, how water plays into, I would say that Colorado water history is a water development story. Economic development in Colorado is a water story. And people may not recognize that. Eric hit on it earlier. Look at our history in the past. It is all centered around water development. And of course, agriculture, Mike said earlier, here's one of my ag perspectives. I read in the headlines, agriculture uses the majority of the water in Colorado, 80 or 90%. I would say, let's not forget, agriculture still owns 80 or 90% of the water. And so it's just that perception about, if agriculture was just a little more efficient, we would have plenty of water for recreational needs, municipal needs, environmental needs. And today, I think we're going to talk about, or at least spark the interest about, how do we meet our Colorado water future and not just take it from agriculture, not just have agriculture relinquish their water for continued growth. The challenge is how, and I think it's possible, Mike. I've been to Sugar City. We've rodeoed, I'm familiar with the Ark Valley, and living in the San Luis Valley, I have my own stories about what's happened to our, not only our agricultural community here, but our wetlands and it's this American phenomenon that if a little is good, a lot's got to be a lot better. And the truth is, we've overdeveloped our water rights. And how do we learn to live within our means? And so there's these pressures from the ag community that I'd like to just share with you about. And does it really matter for all of you today from an economic standpoint about our history, our rich agricultural history that's tied to our water use? Does it really matter? If we could go to the next slide quickly, Kim, there's this other character that James alluded to, John Wesley Powell. He probably is rolling around wherever he's buried. Never have we talked about Lake Powell as much. And of course, it's this guy right here. But he made this profound statement: in the absence of water management based on best science, endless conflict would ensue. And I would agree. He had some radical notions about, rather than just drawing a straight line down to the four corners for Utah, Arizona, New Mexico, and Colorado, an arbitrary line that some bureaucrat drew on a map. Here we are now, 150, 60 years later, still arguing about what is mine and what is yours should be mine. So this, based on the best science, that's an interesting comment right there. And it really depends. So whose science? Whose data? And so before I go on, I just want to offer up also this water supply issue, this Western water crisis. It's a social issue. It is really how we perceive where we've come from, where we want to be in the future. And the Colorado Water Plan's been mentioned many times. I want to encourage you all. It is a awesome document. Several of us have our fingerprints all over the water plan. It was a huge lift in 2013 about could we have a document that gives us something to stand on, recognizing our current uses. Agriculture, and Mike mentioned it, but there's been many surveys. Department of Ag just did one a year or so ago. Most Coloradans place a high importance on agriculture. Well, that's great, but the current mode is, and Emily is part of it, all of our large municipalities there are willing sellers of their water in the ag community. There are people calling Colorado Springs utilities. They want to sell their water rights. So how do you balance? How do you balance continued growth? And is that the best science? And then how do we, I don't like the term preserve agriculture. That kind of sounds like that we're on life support, but vibrant agricultural communities and the importance that they bring to our lifestyle that Mike had mentioned. There are the agricultural culture, if you will. Think about it as a culture, that the rural lifestyle. There is another document that I'd like to direct you to. Our good friend Teddy Roosevelt, who's probably getting a bad rap these days about his motives. There's a document from 1909 that Teddy Roosevelt commissioned, that it was privately paid for, and it's called the Report of the Country Life Commission. And it talks about there was this transition going on in 1909, that the country was very agriculturally based. It was a rural economy, but now people were leaving the farm, going to the urban areas. We were getting ready for World War I. There was this social movement that was going on across the country. Here were the main issues that came out of this report that I thought were just fascinating. The main issues out of this report of the Country Life Commission was health access, transportation, education, communication, environment, economics, and then probably the most profound, representation in rural communities when it regarding state legislatures. So we have this transition that's going on in Colorado. Eastern Colorado, there's a lot of towns that used to be. There's a lot of towns in the San Luis Valley that used to be. And I think every rural area has that picture about, do we want to just continue to dry up the rural areas of Colorado at the benefit of maybe another area? And I see that that's a social issue, gets us beyond the water issue. There's another interesting piece that I'd like you just to consider, describing the urban-rural divide. And I look at the definition of rural. And one of the definitions of rural is anything that isn't defined by being urban. I thought that was pretty interesting. And now I'm hearing a different term, that I don't live in a rural area, I live in the frontier. And I thought, well, who determines that? So we have, from an urban rural perspective, the rural areas, agriculture still owns most of the water. Colorado is a prior appropriation state. The Colorado Water Doctrine, I'm proud to say that the water plan, right on the first page or two, said the water plan was not to come And thank you, Kim, for that next slide. The prior appropriation doctrine still works in Colorado. And I am a champion of the prior appropriation system. It has evolved. It has weathered the test of time. It is a enduring concept that other Western states, most of them, the 7 of them have embraced it. California is kind of an outlier. Maybe we can have another session. Thank God we're not operating under California's water law. But what is about to happen is, as the population shifts from rural to urban, and we lose that rich understanding about Colorado history, about the prior appropriation system, that you'll hear that, and it's coming out somewhat in the Colorado River discussions about this compact's 100 years old. It can't be valid any longer. These compacts are 100 years old. They must not be relevant any longer. And I think that's a dangerous place to be. So the municipalities have all gone out and acquired by willing sellers senior water rights. Some of the eastern municipality, East Slope, went out and appropriated unappropriated water from the West Slope. That can be another session if we have an appetite about really operating under the prior appropriation system. But most of this water that Denver and Colorado, the whole Front Range, Grand Junction, you look at any metropolitan area, they were ag water rights at some point. And as the population moves away from our rich history, the potential for having a ballot initiative for a public trust doctrine or for creating some new water administrative scheme based on the highest and best use, I'm of the opinion that is a dangerous place to be. So how do we raise the public awareness about the importance of our limited resource, really how it connects us? This urban-rural divide, I think it's a real thing. It's not just for conversation. It's about we're losing the connection about the importance of what the rural communities bring, the open space, all the benefits of irrigated agriculture for wildlife, recreation. Somebody's floating on somebody's senior water right on the Arkansas River. It's really just raising this public awareness that, Kim, I deeply appreciate being able to just have this conversation with this group of difference makers. You all have influence out there, and I'm hoping that we can just raise our awareness about, and it might sound kind of goofy, that we need each other. Just more jobs and good paying jobs, they're important. But rural economies are at stake now. There is a lot of rural stress going on from the agricultural community that we might be able to discuss a little more in depth. And Mike kind of hit on it. It's the uncertainty. Everybody wants economic opportunities, but the landscape is changing. And I'll just try to finish up with representation. From a rural perspective, I have a state senator that represents about 15 rural counties, and that's true on the Eastern Plains. We're running out of ag representation, water right representation in the legislature, and how do we communicate that? How do we get next to the difference makers and decision makers about what does economic vitality look for all of us in Colorado? So I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in and be a part of this conversation. James,
thank you, Travis. Appreciate it. Emily, you sit at really the crossroads of so much of what we're talking about. We know that the Front Range of Colorado is the economic beating heart of this state. If you put it another way, if we go into a recession on the Front Range, it gets felt, not only felt, it also is experienced on the Western Slope, on the Eastern Plains, in South Central Colorado. It's all consuming, and it's the kind of one of those things where the Front Range sneezes, the Western Slope and the Eastern Plains catch a cold. So it's critical that we get this right, and the not if we grow, how we grow conversation that I think Eric, Mike, and Travis have teed up pretty well, leads us to where you are. So I'll turn it over to you without further ado, and take the time you need, since you get to bat last in the order here.
Thanks so much, James, and thanks for the invitation to be here. It is really great to see the variety and diversity of geographic perspectives on this call. And my brain right now is just exploding with so many things that I want to say. So I'm probably going to go a little off script as I move through my presentation, but I just want to thank Travis and Mike and Eric. I have about a bunch of quotes written down from you guys, because you gave me so much to think about. And one of the things that I want to echo what Travis said is that this really is a social issue. It really is. It is a people issue, right? You guys on this call are in the business of creating jobs. Travis and Mike are in the business of feeding us, which is really important. I'm in the business of making sure that, basic human rights to water and hygiene are satisfied, as well as hopefully a slightly better quality of life too, with a little bit of discretion. And so I agree that the urban-rural divide is a real thing. And I also believe that, as James, you said, in Thornton and on the Front Range, we are very much at kind of the urban-rural confluence, is how I like to think about it, because we do kind of have all of these different values and all of these different needs and desires kind of colliding. And I think there is so much opportunity there. And so what I wanted to do today was kind of walk you through a little bit of the Thornton story, just because I do think that it illustrates a lot of what we've talked about, but I am going to go off script a little bit just to reflect on some of the things that my colleagues have said as we've moved forward. So if we can go through to the next slide, I want to just make sure that folks on the call understand. I don't have control, do I? I just wanted to make sure that folks on the call could understood kind of municipal water planning 101. So that next slide in the presentation should be kind of a principles of water planning. I don't know if it's not coming up, but essentially what we have a lot of things to balance. First of all, we have to acquire a source of supply. We have to acquire that raw water source in Colorado. And we've already heard how that's done in some instances. Sometimes it is a purchase and acquisition of an existing senior water right, as it was in agriculture. Sometimes it's an appropriation of the new junior water right, which can happen kind of in your stream region, or it can happen on the Western Slope, as is what happened in a lot of instances. Sometimes it's a contract supply that an entity just gets to kind of buy off of another entity. Well, that means that entity has had to go and acquire those water rights in some way. But those are kind of our sources. We've got wells in some instances. Then you've got raw water infrastructure. As James teed our conversation up, the population is on the Eastern Slope. Most of the water is on the West Slope. Even in a city like Thornton, where we actually don't take any Western Slope water, our sources of supply are still not necessarily adjacent to our rivers, or our city is not necessarily adjacent to our source of supply. So there are pipelines all over this state moving water from where it is to where it is needed. It is really kind of the oldest thing in the world. And if we can't move the slides, you can just kind of shut them down, and I've got them pulled up so I can at least keep myself on track. And so, that's the infrastructure needs are very real and things that water providers and ag have to deal with. On the water provider side, we've got treatment and distribution. We get our raw water to the place where we need it. We have to treat it to higher and more stringent standards. We just learned of some new stringent standards yesterday that came out with the EPA's new guidance on PFAS, which is a pretty dramatic burden, I should say, on drinking water providers. So we're constantly dealing with that. And then we've also kind of got the demand management side. I'm not talking about capital D, capital M demand management that we hear about on the Colorado River Basin stuff. I'm talking about municipal water efficiency, industrial water efficiency, that sort of thing. So those are kind of all of the things that are in the purview of providing a municipal water supply for residents as well as businesses and industry that comes in. But just kind of like I said, all of those are people things, right? They're all about people. It's all about jobs. It's all about food. It's all about places to live, quality of life. And then we also have environment and recreation, which is kind of that quality of life thing, but they all really do have to kind of work together. Thornton's story is kind of an interesting one. If for those of you that are across the state and maybe you don't know where we are too much, you drive past us as you go on I-25. We're a little bit north of Denver. We're a relatively new municipality. We were incorporated in the 50s, and we had to basically start our water supply from square one. A lot of the other suburban areas around Denver are Denver water customers, but Thornton is its own water provider. We first started off by kind of taking advantage of the local supplies that were near us. We're pretty near Clear Creek, and we're pretty near South Platte. And these were ag areas back in the 20s, kind of some truck farms along the Clear Creek ditches. And so it is one of those instances where urbanization kind of grew over ag. And the first natural transition was to take that agricultural water and just simply turn it into a rooftop, but it was very localized. So Thornton really took advantage of kind of that dynamic that was going on. Just as the urban area was growing, we utilized those water rights that were originally used to supply that very local ag. We became a partner in the Two Forks Reservoir Project. Could you raise your hand if anybody is familiar with Two Forks? It's a very large reservoir project on the South Platte that was spearheaded by Denver Water. And it was really kind of designed to provide a lot of the water supply for almost the entire metro area. It came on the heels of really right after the environmental movement started kind of gaining some traction, and there was real significant opposition to Two Forks. Thornton was relying on that reservoir project for its future growth and kind of saw the writing on the wall a little bit earlier than others. And we also were experiencing really significant water quality degradation on the South Platte River as well as Lower Clear Creek. And Two Forks would have just delivered us additional South Platte water. And so our city management at the time, this would have been in the 80s, decided they needed to bail on Two Forks and try to find a different alternative supply. So we did. Two Forks was eventually vetoed by the EPA. And in my opinion, was really a very critical point in time that sent a lot of water providers running to ag, running to those agricultural to municipal transfers, because this big, massive water supply all of a sudden was not viable. So, I'm sure there were problems with the dam. There was we were kind of at the very end of the big dam building era, but that really is a pivotal point, I think, in Front Range water development that started all of a sudden to put a lot more pressure on agriculture. And Mike kind of talked about the very first pieces of that happened when Aurora and Colorado Springs went and went down to that part of the state. Thornton did a similar thing. We went up north. We went into Weld County, Larimer and Weld County, and looked for an additional supply. We needed a high quality supply because the South Platte supply was quite degraded. And we needed enough to provide our ultimate population. And so we purchased water rights in the Water Supply and Storage Company, which is a mutual ditch company, purchased water rights from willing sellers and ended up buying just under half of the water in that company. I did have a map. Oh, I wonder if I can share. Can I share? I'm going to do that. Look at me.
I do apologize. I had
me being a problem solver. Let's see. I'm sorry. I didn't even think about that before, but I think this map can be kind of helpful. How'd I do?
Perfect.
Yes. Let me blow through. Okay. So here's a map of where Thornton purchased his water rights. What you see, I'm not sure. Can you see my cursor?
Yes.
Okay, so this is the Cache La Puta River. This is the town of Fort Collins. Fort Collins is quite a bit north of Thornton, so we're talking about a 40 to 50-mile stretch. And the dark line is the Larimer County Canal, which is the main canal that carries the Water Supply and Storage Company water out to all of these farms. It goes through, kind of north of the city of Fort Collins, all the way out to Alt, Eaton, east of Highway 85. And the farms that you see here in green are the farms that Thornton purchased back in the 80s, along with the water rights. And so, as I mentioned, we own about under half of the properties and the water that's irrigated by the Water Supply and Storage Company. So, as I said, we are at the confluence of the urban-rural divide. We came on the heels of some of the transfers that Mike talked about. Thornton's decree through the water court received immense scrutiny, spent about 10 years getting through the water court process, went to the Supreme Court, came back down to the water court. We have about a 4-inch decree that guides what we can do with our water rights transfer. And a lot of that decree, the terms were designed to prevent some of the damage that was done in those transfers that had preceded us. So this was obviously the 1980s. What have we been doing since? We continue to irrigate around 2/3 of these properties. We lease our property and our water to local farmers. Some of them were the ones that originally sold to us. The remaining, the first third has already been converted from irrigated ag into dryland grasses. That's what our decree requires. We had to get it certified by the Natural Resources Conservation Service to make sure that we were good stewards of the land. About 5 years ago, and this is where I'm going to go a little bit off script, is we kind of decided that we wanted to take a little bit of a different approach to our agricultural to municipal transfer. Our decree kind of outlined some very specific things that we wanted to do, but we also, after having been up there for 30 years, really heard feedback from the community, like, hey, ag is important, obviously, to Weld County. Thornton, your ownership up here is keeping smaller communities from being able to grow and take advantage of some of the economic opportunities up there. Hey, this area might be a really nice wildlife buffer. This area is right next to the Pawnee grasslands. What are you going to do with that? And so all these questions coming in about how we were going to ultimately utilize these properties once the water was removed. And we started this thing called our Northern Property Stewardship Plan. And it is a completely voluntary effort on Thornton's part. We pulled together funding from the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, DOLA, as well as Thornton, to bring together a stakeholder group, steering committee group of around 30 experts in the region, ag experts, energy experts, representatives from the local counties, Weld and Larimer, representatives from the cities that we were near, towns, I should say, Alt and Pierce, Timnah, that sort of thing. And then other interests, the dairy interests, which are really big in Weld County, and really started having everybody come to the table and say, what is everybody's vision for this area? What do we want to do? What does this want to look like? And because there really isn't a regional planning exercise going on up in this part of the county. And we thought, rather than being seen as a controlling force, controlling all this acreage up here, what if we became kind of a stabilizing force and allowed this conversation to happen so that we could then make some land use decisions that reflected what the local communities and local stakeholders actually wanted to do. Another value that became really apparent was, how do we keep ag viable and thriving into the future? And that's one of the nuts that we've really been trying to crack is, can we identify some really high producing ag lands that we can try to keep in irrigated ag as long as possible? And even when Thornton does need that water, can we find some alternative sources of water to keep those lands in production? What makes it really difficult in this area is that this water is ridiculously expensive and valuable. It's around $4 million a share of Water Supply and Storage Company, which comes to about $70,000 an acre foot. The only people that can afford that is developers, municipalities, that kind of thing. So that's the real issue that we're kind of wrestling with right now is how do we make it economically viable for ag? And this really brings up that social issue, right? People value the open space. People value the ag. People value being able to have their jobs, but then having recreational opportunities nearby. Are we going to be able to come together to kind of create the alignment of all of these things to be able to happen and incentivize it if we need to in some instances? So we've got, in our project, we've got agriculture that we're trying to make happy. So I'm going to kind of skip over here to our problem around infrastructure, which is that we owned this land, we own this water, we went to water court, we got a decree. Now we're just trying to build a pipeline. And originally that seemed like a pretty simple, relatively standard infrastructure exercise, because as I mentioned, there's raw water pipelines, pump stations, and facilities up and down the Colorado, up and down the Front Range, all over the state. But we really did bump up into some issues around our pipeline construction, specifically in Larimer County. We were denied a land use permit from them through their 1041 regulations. Even though it's a 7-mile pipeline through a relatively rural section of Larimer County, all of these community interests kind of bubble to the surface. What about ag? What about the health of the Poudre River? And so it really is this kind of collision of all of the things that we're dealing with as water providers and water consumers, right? We're all water consumers. We're trying to balance all of this so that we can do this project in a way, not in a kind of an old school way that maybe we used to do things 60 years ago, but in a new way where we're making sure that ag remains viable. We're making sure that the Poudre River, which, by the way, our project does not impact at all, because this water has been diverted from the Poudre River for over 100 years. But we're doing our best to try to make sure that that river, which is really important to the communities of Fort Collins all the way down, remains vibrant and attractive and has recreational opportunities. And so, as James said, I think that's my favorite intro, that I represent the face of Colorado stress or something. I don't know. I'm going to use it though, because that is how it feels. But I do think we do find ourselves kind of at the crossroads of all of these different interests. I am really proud of the way that we're doing it. We don't have to do it this way, but I think as the community that we are, and the appreciation that we are impacting other communities, and the appreciation that we just have to do water differently. We just have to. That's kind of the approach that the city is taking. We need to balance all of these interests. We need to hear from all of the interests, whether it's ag, environment, simple construction impacts, that kind of thing. We're trying to kind of balance it all together. What that means for economic development is uncertainty, because we do not have a pipeline and we do not have a permit to build a pipeline, which has caused us to place some guardrails on the current development that we're allowing in the city, both residential and economic and commercial. We, by statute, cannot allow development to occur if we don't have water supply for it. It's a very good bars to have. We take that responsibility very seriously. And so until we get some certainty around our ability to construct the portion of the pipeline that goes through Larimer County, we're having some really hard conversation with our development and our residential development and our commercial development community, saying we got to have some certainty here. We just simply can't allow anything to happen that we can't serve. We do have a certain amount of water in our existing supply. So we're not on a moratorium. Things haven't come to a screeching halt in Thornton or anything, but we're looking ahead to this 5-10 year horizon, where if we don't get certainty here in the next couple of years, we're going to have to make some real changes. So that uncertainty trickles out to the developers. It makes things more expensive. It makes timing very difficult to manage. And so, that is, in my mind, kind of the cost of trying to really integrate all of these issues and make sure that we're doing water development in a different way, in a more thoughtful way, and in a more resilient way for all of the different communities and interests that it impacts. So I think I'm going to pause there. I don't think I went too far off the rails. Did I, James?
No, you did not. That was fantastic stuff. You're putting your finger right on the pressure point, which is exactly what we're trying to do. And in this conversation, Eric posted an excellent comment. If you pull up your chats, this is from Eric Wallace. And Eric, you can unmute and share more on this if you want. But the comment is basically around, listen, we've got to, it's not if we grow, it's how we grow. If we're going to do this in a way that takes into account the factors that Mike so passionately detailed and that Travis highlighted, that and with the full recognition that if we don't have this growth happen in a place like Thornton where it's trying to do it in a responsible way with the benefit of the hindsight of the Crowley County buy and dry example and trying to avoid that, we're really going to be pushing growth outside of the, regional council of governments type of footprint that has been in ways disrespected over the years. We're going to be pushing that growth somewhere in the Front Range, and they may not, in fact, they probably won't be in a position to do what we have been talking about here, what Emily talked about as a smarter, better way to grow the next segment of population that needs to come online in these communities. So with that, Emily, and then I promise I'll give it back to Eric. Crowley County was really a perfect storm or a train wreck that happened because, yes, the water that Mike described was purchased by Aurora and Colorado Springs. And they did something similar to what you've done in that they put in a cover crop, but then people bought that land and tried their hand at dryland farming and disked up, tilled that ground up. The cover crop was then therefore gone. They put seed in the ground, and when it didn't rain, that area blew, and that created this Dust Bowl type of scenario that I know we want to prevent from happening again. What are you guys doing in the northern Colorado area where you have land and water to prevent that from being the result there? If your pipeline moves forward, and we'll go right to the NIMBY question, which is what Eric articulated here in a second, but if you could kind of give us a feel for that, that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. So Thornton still owns almost all of the property that it purchased. And our water court decree says that we are responsible for the revegetation of that land, like 3 years after the very last drop of water is delivered to Thornton. So that puts our responsibility out there until like probably the 2070s. So the water court and the objectors that were involved with that case did a really good job of making sure that Thornton was on the hook for the stewardship of that land well into the future. What we've learned is that our ownership up there is not necessarily what everybody else wants. And so what we're trying to do through this stewardship plan is, okay, how do we transfer ownership back into private hands or local public hands, but also make sure that that responsibility that our water court case puts on us is preserved so that, the responsible stewardship of that land gets carried way out. So we're looking at really innovative kind of land transactions. We're looking at hopefully keeping keeping a lot of the property in agriculture, just maybe not irrigated agriculture. We're experimenting with some grazing because we got lots of dairies nearby. So we're really trying to kind of find that balance, but luckily, the water court did a really good job of ensuring that stewardship. And so what we're trying to do is take that one step further and say, rather than Thornton controlling all this property for the next 70 years, or I shouldn't say 50 years, I should say, how can we be a little bit innovative about that, but make sure that the communities and the land is still thriving, and we don't see what happened in Crowley County.
Thank you. I appreciate that. That's a good detail that I think people benefit from as they're thinking about growth and how we grow. Eric, great comment. I'll let you elaborate on that if you want, and maybe you can tee up a question in there for one of your fellow panelists.
Well, let's see where we end up going here.
Okay.
As I said at the beginning, I know a little bit about a lot of different things, but I'm not an expert in very much. But as I got dragged into the housing issue because my kids couldn't afford to live in town, so they were living in Firestone, and my employees can't afford to live in town, so they're living in Fort Collins, in Loveland, in Greeley, and in Thornton, in North Glen. They're scattered all over Kingdom Come. So it's dragged me into deeper in, and it's apparent that most of us don't get all the way to the core issue. It's just so freaking complicated. And but the core issue, water in the West is one of the most core issues. And I think that it could eventually be the force that's going to force us all into realizing that we are all on the same team as much as we're fighting each other. Our Longmont Economic Development Partnership uses uses collective impact as kind of as a model for how we try to advocate and impact and modify policy. And that requires you, as previous speakers have said, listen to all the stakeholders and find out what's really your concern. And NIMBYs, in many cases, well, the environment's my concern. All this traffic is killing me. They're making all of the brown cloud get worse. It's like, yeah. And every time you say, don't build it next to me, there's a lot of land just north of the brewery. People want to infill, and they're going to have a fight. And it can reduce hundreds of vehicle miles per living unit per week, because those people are going to end up living in Weld if we don't build it here in Longmont. And they don't realize that they're working against what they purport to support. So I think this getting everyone more and more and more informed is part of it, but water could really force us to focus on housing, get your housing more efficient and closer. Aurora cutting off, lawns and kind of stuff. I spent a year in Vegas among many places I've lived. They don't even have lawns anymore. There's a lot of things you can do to reduce use. It can impact the viability of transportation and public transportation. It can reduce car necessity as you focus your development where development already is and make transit work from where people are to where they want to be. It's just, everyone wants to fix transit, but you can't fix transit without fixing land use. It can help mitigate our impact on climate. It can reduce the impact on natural resources and rec, wildlife, everything. Every time we plow a field down or dry it up, we're impacting other stuff. It impacts public health even. I mean, OEDIT was part of that state land use report last July. So water may finally be the one thing that forces everyone to the table, because up till now, we are Labradors, or even worse, we're goldfish. We only have a 10-second attention span, and then we're happy again.
Well done. I think that's right. Maybe we're some sort of weird cross between goldfish and Labradors. Travis and Mike, one of these, Eric, that was really well said. I've often described it as when you talk about water, you pull the thread and you get the whole sweater. So you get land use, you get housing, you get transportation, you get food supply, food security, you get the whole thing. One of those intersections that is really interesting to me as a water lawyer in Colorado is, Travis and Mike, I'd love your perspectives or anybody's perspective on this, but we've got a situation where we've created assets. We've created water rights that are assets. And sometimes they're our best performing asset in our operations. And in that setting, what is the conflict or the tension that erupts there is, you ask 100 people down on the 16th Street Mall outside my window here, if it should be a public policy that allows private individuals, farms, ranchers, to own water rights. They'll tell you, I bet 90% of them would say, no, that's a bad idea. We wouldn't want to do that. And then once you describe to them the actual way we have set up this system, they go, oh, well, wait a minute. I wouldn't want somebody taking my real estate away from me, my house away from me, just because they don't think I'm doing it the right way. Where's that? How do we deal with that intersection between that tension between kind of a public conventional wisdom that these water rights should be owned and managed by the public for the public, and this really business economically driven perspective that, well, this is my best performing asset. I need to control this as a business owner. What are your thoughts on that? Travis, I see you've unmuted first, so I'll go to you first.
Well, James, we don't have enough time to unpack what you just set up for us, but it is. I would say we've gotten too far away from the farm or the ranch in regards to water rights and private property rights, and we have a population now that is. I saw in a chat earlier. It's me, and it's almost that because we've disconnected ourselves from our rich history, private property still is our greatest asset. But the water connection, and so this might be a little disjointed here, but Eric prompted this earlier. I have suggested in other venues, as complicated as water appears to be, Water Congress and Water Education Colorado is now currently holding the demystify sessions with our legislators about demystifying water 101, 102. But water can be the great convener. And I think that's what we're talking about here, is because of the crisis that we all need water. It's a public resource, but the Colorado Water Doctrine has, by the rule of law, over 140 years now, I have to do the math, maybe more, beneficial use. So we're having these new voices that are coming and adding to the strain about, well, yeah, it's a public resource. Well, water ought to be treated like air. Everybody deserves air. But I think we're at this moment in time, and I want to give Mike some time here also, that water, the forest health issue, is not just about issues on the federal lands. What we found in my current work is the great connector is the water. What happens downstream when you have massive wildfire, infrastructure damage, the how it rocks the economy when I-70 gets shut down? It's still tied to, are we good stewards of the resources we have? How are we going to manage an increasing population? How are we going to have enough of this wonderful natural resources that we all share together? But then you're exactly right, James, the private property rights. You see it with caps on rent in the Denver area, or you've got the government. People have a general idea that the government can come in and fix all of these issues, and I don't have confidence that the government can do that. And so it's forums like this that we can inform and influence and add to the conversation about, what do we want Colorado to look like in the future? Do we want it all asphalt and concrete and Walmart? I don't. So it's really this. These kind of conversations really stimulate me about the water issue. I think is one unifying issue that out of a crisis will bring us together to solve these issues. And I'll yield to Mike.
Yeah, Mike, your thoughts.
Yeah, Travis. It's imperative that we preserve those personal property rights. And I know what's happened in the past is, farmers that sold out, and you talk about willing sellers. Well, they didn't have any choice. Oftentimes, they're looking at, and somebody comes along and offers a huge chunk of change to, solve their problem that they just got through a drought, or their family doesn't want to farm anymore, and you offer 3 or 4 times the value of your farm. You're going to take the exit ramp right there a lot of times. And that's how these water deals get started. It's not really that it's, there are willing sellers, but it's kind of under duress, so to speak, that these are often done. But what we've done more recently, and it's more optimistic, is that we developed alternatives to that buy and dry that we saw in the 70s and the 80s. And things like conservation easements are a great way to monetize the value of that water. Or there's things like this leasing ability. If we can kind of keep borders on that, that's a great way that we look at that as another crop to monetize the value of the water we have. So again, it was a wall-worn path, that path to buy and dry, and what we've done in the past. And to subsidize urban sprawl really has changed, and hopefully we've got these other things that we can develop that will kind of change us in a different direction. So
fantastic. We're quickly running out of time. It has flown by because this panel is just exactly what I thought it would be, which is top notch. Emily, I'm gonna circle back to you, and we'll go in reverse order on closing thoughts. Anything else that you wanted to say or respond to, or thoughts that you have, and then once everybody's done that, we'll wrap. And yeah, so take it away.
I'll be really brief. This has just been really interesting and stimulating conversation, and I'm super excited for the interest. And I'll just kind of close with a little bit of a personal soapbox of mine, and that is that, I really do believe that we are all interconnected. This issue is all interconnected. I think we will move a lot, whatever our individual challenges are, if we kind of move beyond the interests of our own backyard, across our own street, and realize that this is really a community and a social problem that we need to solve. And I think just keeping that perspective, I know from my standpoint, really helps. It can become overwhelming at times, but it's also the only way through, unless we just want to keep pushing bigger problems down the road. So thanks for bringing this topic together. It's been really interesting.
Awesome. Travis, your thoughts?
Yeah, what a great opportunity for me. I see we're down to 57 viewers. If you can capture more than 50 people for 2 hours, pretty impressive. I would, and here's a plug for the Colorado Water Congress, for you economic development members representing municipalities. If you're not a member of the Colorado Water Congress, I would encourage you to at least check it out, to have a voice in the legislature also collectively. And we would like to, we have 2 events each year. We want to bring this conversation, bring your perspective and what that means. So we're not just talking to ourselves. And what I've observed here today is by listening and learning from each other, what a great opportunity to really expand our perspective. And so this has all been very helpful for me this morning. Sometimes we talk to ourselves, or we talk to our like-minded people, and we grovel. But I'm convinced if we can learn from one another and not just talk at each other, to listen and learn from one another, Colorado has this ability to solve some problems. And I come from the San Luis Valley. I didn't talk much about the groundwater management struggle down here. But it's a great success story about self-government and people getting their self-interest, which is hard to get past, self-interest, and what's good for the ag community and the whole community. And so this has been beneficial for me, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you, Travis. Mike, your closing thoughts.
Just I want to thank this group for getting the opportunity to speak with you, and just a recommendation: why don't you go buy a watermelon, walk you for a watermelon this year, a bushel of Pueblo chili, pull off the side of the road and talk to me. And that's what we like to talk about. I love to hear people that are interested in agriculture. So come out and visit. Love to have you over. Thanks.
Fantastic. Maybe wash it down with the beer, Eric. What's your thoughts? You're on mute. Sorry.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah, breweries are just one form of third place. Barbershops, cafes, community centers, granges, wherever people from different parts of society and economic strata intersect, builds community, kind of like this is our third place for this temporary bond. It's where you tend to go back to, and you start to meet different people. These are the kind of conversations that we'd love to host here, either down in Denver, we've got a room, or up here, but getting together and continuing the conversation is fundamental so that society doesn't just like spin apart as we all doom scroll and get pulled to the polls. And I think most people are in the middle. and most people want to be pragmatic and try to solve things. So from the brewery standpoint, we function like that in our own tasting room and in our place. You know, that's what we try to do. The tee, I know I missed the tee up, but there's no way that we're going to even get to that. But I would propose this home rule fight is really going to be a huge, huge issue. It's really going to impact how cities continue to develop, whether we are going to embrace sprawl as our way of life, whether we're going to start to try to reverse that trend, whether we're going to try to actually make all of these different systems I referenced work, if they're going to start to work. I spent 20 years living overseas, everywhere from Tokyo to little towns in Italy, and everybody does it differently than we do it. We've got this vast resource of land, unlike most countries on this planet, and we've got to change the way we do things. I think home rule, because one town can say, we're going to build as much as we want, and you can't stop us. That spills over into every other town in their region. And that is how do we solve that? Is it a carrot or is it a stick? But it's important.
Here's the importance of you tuning into this conversation. This is a voice, this is a sector that has not been really present in the water conversation to date. And it's really important, like Eric said, whatever venue works for you. I'm often the one that says, we don't want this conversation to be taking place in a courtroom. We want it to be in a conference room. I think Eric makes it clear, we want these conversations to be in bars and in coffee shops and in local community gathering places, because that is the Colorado voice and experience and discussion that we need in order to confront this with an innovative kind of Colorado-esque idea of how we navigate all these challenges. Doing it in a way that is fragmenting ourselves and making us into, a bunch of turf guarding, NIMBY folks is not going to get the job done and preserve the Colorado that we all want to pass on to the next generation of Colorado. So with that, I will we'll bring it to a close. Kim, any last words from you?
Oh my goodness. So as I said, when I first started this off this is just the very beginning, and the call to action, especially from this group, is being heard. It has been apparent just watching everyone participating. We will continue this conversation. Matt, thank you for asking the question. We hope that our speakers today will be willing to reach out and be contacted so that we can have these conversations in our regionals, that we can bring you around our roundtables all over the state to have these conversations. And the more of these conversations that we're having, the more that we can make those changes. And we are the change makers. Economic developers have always been the change makers, and we know we've been through the strategic planning of all of our communities, right? So how do we utilize that and apply it to our livelihood and the preservation of our community, of our state?